All right, everyone. Today I'm going to work on an 18 by 24 piece of hardboard. You can hear it. Toned it with a little acrylic gesso, a little burnt umber, a little ultramarine blue, and a little yellow ochre. You can kind of see it's not that dissimilar to my flesh tone. Maybe a little duller, which is, my preference is always slightly a little bit on the muted side and a little bit on the light side. Whether it's warm or cool truly doesn't matter. I did some quick pencil marks up here so I can kind of get thing. And what I'm painting is the area up by where we live, the Fountain Grove Barn. I painted it a few times on location, and unfortunately, it's a incredible landmark up here. But during the Tubbs fire, it burned down. So I figured, let's commemorate it with a piece of art here. Okay, so we're going to kind of get a little bit of the feel of it in there. It's a little bit of kind of architecture and foliage. So we're going to kind of there, and go right here. Just get some of these key elements in here. I usually do almost like you're doing a dotted line. I just find it easier. And my intent always when I'm demonstrating or when I'm doing any form of teaching is to do what I consider the easiest way. There's a lot of ways of going about it. I know I've done some where I've just started painting. That's another approach. You just start blocking things in and then correct as you go. In this case, I make a few key marks and correct as I go. The side and the side here, and let's see, get some trees. And a little bit of shadow here. There's a tree up here. I want to get an overlap. So that's why we're kind of blocking these elements in approximately. Some nice foliage at the bottom. What the foliage allows you to do, it's really kind of neat, because what foliage generally allows is for you to get kind of a, I don't want to say abstract, because I don't really mean abstract, but a more free form kind of a stroke. Where with architecture, you get to play with the differences in kind of the free form, very organic kind of feel of foliage, trees, and then with architecture, you're dealing with something much more mechanical. And there are people, I remember I went to school with a lot of guys that love drawing cars, and they just loved the architecture side, but they didn't have a lot of affinity for foliage, ground planes, things like that, because it's such a different way of thinking. So when you combine the two together, it's really terrific. It allows you to do a little bit of both. Get your drawing, your perspective. I have to watch just a little bit, eye level, just a little bit above this, just probably about here. All right, that's probably about where the eye level is. Some foliage over here. So we want to get enough of this in. 90% of my painting obviously is going to happen right here in a quarter of the surface. And it's quite often, unless you're doing a major cityscape, which I remember the last one that I did was a cityscape. Well, when you do a cityscape, you're definitely not doing one area of concentration, although you can be if you deal with a big heavy shadow. But the last one I had stuff going on everywhere. In this case, we're concentrating on one area. Usually what I will always do, as you guys probably know, is I'm going to start with the sky. Now I have two prints up here. They're both little 8x10 that I made on my printer. I didn't have them printed like I usually do. And I made on my own little printer. One is on regular paper, which came out a little darker, and the other is on photo paper, which came out a little lighter and gives me a little bit more clarity. I'm going to work between the two. So I'm going to start with a little bit of ultramarine blue, Naples yellow, and white. tends to be a color I use for my blue skies quite often. Just it's a comfortable color for me. And I know I know a few artists, and I can almost recognize the painter by the color they paint the sky. It's interesting. Everybody's got their kind of favorite mixture that they use for skies. I'm kind of giving you mine. Although I do mix it up a little bit, and I will change it. I go up and down, across, go a little bit of a round in here. I don't like the sky. I like the sky to have a little bit of color movement, meaning that it isn't a flat, gradated, singular tone. It's interesting because when I was first painting, after illustrating first, when I was first painting, I was always trying to get these skies to be very clean and beautiful. And then upon studying many artists, I started realizing that the skies that I was attracted to that other artists had done, and I think that's how you learn, everybody. I think you learn by looking at other art that you like, and you kind of say, well, I'm going to kind of try something like that. You know, and that's that line that the artist Dan Gouze told me years and years ago, and that is to steal from one is plagiarism, to steal from many is research. And what I'm leading up to is, you know, if you have 4 or 5 different artists that you say, geez, I kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you start emulating or attempting to emulate some of those characteristics of all those different artists, you are, in essence, taking from many different artists. Let's say you love something about Rembrandt, and I'm going to use artists that most people know, and then on the other hand, you love Monet. Well, Monet uses a lot more color and choppy strokes, and Rembrandt uses a very severe, heavy, light-oriented palette in terms of, by light, I mean direction of light. And Monet may work and so maybe you want to chop it up like Monet, but you want to stay with Rembrandt's palettes. That's kind of what I mean about stealing from many. One would be what Rembrandt does, and the second one would be what Monet does. You like a little bit of both of them. Well, I like all kinds of artists, and I have kind of a problem with that because at times I want to be influenced by Nikolai Fechin with his gutsy strokes. At times I want to be influenced by John Singer Sargent with his wonderful movement of paint. Times I want to limit my palette more like an Andrew Wyeth. And so all these artists, and what those artists did is they built on the backs of other artists that they learned from or that they liked. And it's how none of us are just pure innovators. We're all influenced by art that we've seen. Generally, not only art that you've seen, but art that you like. That's an important factor. Now, I'm kind of putting a bank of clouds in here, and I might kind of do a little bit of, and I might shift that around later, I don't know. But for right now, it feels good. And I'm using this little gesso brush simply for the sake of speed. And I kind of like some of the strokes that it gives me. Okay, so we have kind of an interesting looking sky. I may change it around. I feel it needs a little bit of violet here and there, so I may throw a little bit of that in there. May throw a little bit more blue, maybe somewhere down, sneaking in right about in here. So maybe we make it feel like there's an end of those clouds. I don't know. It feels okay. So next thing we're going to do is there's these hills, which you probably cannot even see. And they're very blue. And I'm going to use blue mix it into the color I was just using, blue meaning ultramarine. It's the only blue I have laid out. And I threw a little bit of, I have a quinacridane magenta out as opposed to pure alizarin. I'll give you my palette in a second. So I'm going to hit those kind of hills back. And I don't want a super crisp edge back here. And I've changed it. I brought the hills a little bit above the barn itself, because I wanted the foliage up there. Now, I stepped back. I'm back about 4 feet. Looks good. I like the value relationships. I'm not crazy. I think I can do a lot more color, interesting things, but it's setting up. It's got that lay-in look that I'm after. Generally, when I start a painting, you're almost after a look of it looking kind of unified. And then I always like to say I unify it and then I break it apart. So by unify, I mean keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate things. And by break it apart, I mean start to build a little bit more complexity into it. So I'm going to start to build a little bit. Took a little bit of my number 2. Kind of indicated that back in here. Just so I know it's there. Okay. So let's move in the what I'm doing is I'm pulling in towards my center of interest, all right? So I'm going to stay with a big old brush that I was just using. I'm going to get a lot of the paint out of it. And you can see when I rub hard, not a lot comes off. So I'm going to take my sap green. I'm going to take a little bit of umber. I have both asphaltum and umber laid out. I have no idea why I did that. I just decided that's what I needed. And this is the dark. And I want it warmer. You know what? I'm going to start with a light. So I'm going to throw some ochre into it. A little bit of more yellow and a little bit of green. And let's see. Kind of want to come up in this realm. Right in it. Geez, that looks okay, you know? So the reason I'm going to do that is I want these edges to not be crisp, because in foliage, edges are not, I mean, unless you're going to go into kind of a designy way of painting. Foliage generally has got kind of what we might refer to as an ethereal type of an edge, meaning you can't quite put your finger on exactly where that edge is because it moves around, drifts around a lot. So it's one of the cool things about painting foliage. And I like to mix up a lot of some warms sometimes. I'm going to throw a little orange into that. Yeah, that felt good. That little bit kind of push up. We want interesting edges. I really, it's something I strive for. And I've noticed a lot of different artists that use different kinds of edges. Some of them are very deliberate and harsh, very almost designed. And others are they put them in and they almost wipe the edges out. In other words, you put it in there and then you say, okay, now I'm going to destroy that edge. If I could show you what I mean by that, I'll take a clean brush and just go plop, okay? Or fuzz, so that's where you kind of lose it. Now, if you don't like that edge, you paint back over it. But what happens is the more freedom you use in the beginning of your painting, the more fun you can, and the easier it is to make other areas look more refined. Areas, you know, painting, and it was something that Don Putman used to talk to me about, is that painting is a matter of color and value relationships. Meaning, it's not necessarily a clean one way of thinking. It can be very high key in some instances, and part of that is a concept you want to always begin your painting with. Begin your painting with an idea of what you're trying to achieve, rather than dictate. You know, and a lot of times in the beginning when you're first learning, I've seen this happen. I was one of these guys. You're basically emulating the image you're looking at, be it on location or be it a photograph that you're looking at. You're really trying to just paint what's there. As you move along, you become a little bit more experienced, and you've seen a lot more art. You may decide you want to push a certain direction, a la, and I'm going to throw out another name here, someone like a Wayne Thiebaud, who is a realist but has his own form of stylization. And that's something that occurs over a period of time. I don't think that happens initially. I think that's something that develops through observation of other artists, once again, other artists that you've looked at, and your own personal taste. I throw a little bit of umber into this to darken it and warm it up. Now what umber is going to do, and maybe I'm going to throw a little quinacridone red, it's going to make the colors, the greens look greener without them looking. So it's one way you can make greens look green without going super acidy on them. Acidy meaning color that just screams out of your picture. It's so strong. And one of the best things you can do is to use warms. It's a warm versus cool thing, everybody. It's, you know, anybody that's studied art and color begins to understand that to make a color look warmer, throw a cool next to it. To make a color look cool, throw a warm next to it. And it's just kind of fun. You just kind of play with edges, brush strokes, color variations, and see what you can get by with. That's actually a good way of putting it. See what you can get by with. See what'll make it without looking really dumb, with really crazy. So I threw a little. I'm going to throw a little blue. I threw a little magenta into it, quinacridone, and now I'm throwing some blue back into that, and we'll just push that back up. A little more red's coming out than I want, so I push more blue into it. Too much blue, so I'm going to throw some orange. Oh, I kind of like that, the way the orange just kind of mushed into the rest. Mush, that's a technical term. Into the rest of the paint. This is just the fun stuff. Work comes when I get to this, okay? Then you got to be right. Now I can play. I can mess around a little bit, try some things, see if I like it. If I don't like it, so I'll switch it around. Sometimes I'm painting with just this part of the brush, not always the tip. The tip, yes, but sometimes you just want that kind of variegated edge, where that edge is not defined cleanly. It's got an interesting characteristic, much like foliage has. You know, foliage is not hard edged. I guess if you get up close to a leaf, yeah, it'll look hard edged, but we don't see trees as individual leaves. We see trees as a multitude of leaves, as a lot of texture, a lot of variation. Think about this, the other thing. If you go to any tree, pick 7 leaves, lay them out on the ground. I'll bet they're all different colors. They may be subtle different colors, but I'll bet they're different colors. And what that tells you is that it's not a matter of just painting green leaves, which I think most people think of when they paint trees. Or I always say to students, a tree is not a brown trunk and green leaves. A tree is all kinds of different variations with it. Now on this side, they're pushed back. These trees are right up alongside the barn, but on the other side, they're pushed way back. So because they're way back, they're going to be lighter. So the value is not going to be near as severe, and it isn't. As I look at it, it's not, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same brush, pull out some pigment, grab maybe a little bit of Naples. How's that? And let's push. Now, I don't like that color. I'm going to put some more ochre into it, and it felt a little too much the same kind of green, so I brought some more orange. That's a little too dark. Let's try it again. Still a little darker than I wanted, so I just kind of push the paint around. And boy, I see a lot of ochre in that. The more it's interesting. When you first glance at something, you see it a certain way. If you take your eyes off it, work for a little bit, then glance back, you see it completely differently. And take that opportunity and use it to create color variation within whatever foliage you're doing. So I'm kind of I'm going to paint some little negatives because it's real abstract. If I blur my eyes at this, which is a very good way of thinking when you're kind of doing this kind of work, particularly in an area like I'm dealing with right now. But if you blur your eyes, and the best way to blur your eye, if you haven't already figured it out, and if I haven't already mentioned it, is to close one eye. And the reason you close one eye is it is no longer, you lose your depth of field, your stereoscopic vision. Then what you do is you squint. Take the one eye you're looking at and you squint. And what happens is it simplifies everything. It becomes blurred, which is how you want your painting to look in the beginning. All right? Or another way of thinking about it, most everybody has taken pictures, right? In your life, you've taken photos. Those of you that have worked with a single reflex camera where you have to focus, when you first look through the lens, it's not in focus. All right, if you think about it, that's the way you want your painting to be. As your painting progresses, bring it more into focus. Just like you would as if you were looking through the lens of a camera and you decide, okay, it's not, I need to do more, and pretty soon you bring it up in a sharp focus. That's the finishing. That's what you do when you finish your painting. You bring it into that beautiful crystal clear focus. I'm going to set that brush down, pick up, I've got a number 6 here, and I'm going to lay some nice dark landmarks using ultramarine and umber, or I could use the asphaltum, but I'm going to use the umber instead. And I'm going to put one right here. And it paint's too dry. When your paint is too dry, you see what happens? So what I can do is I can either add terp or I can add medium. Now when I make my stroke, look at, we got a couple of nice bars in there, but it's a nice big dark massive opening. This barn was really very, very cool. There was nothing going on here. It basically was a landmark, and it was kind of an icon for this area of Santa Rosa. It kind of announced that you were heading into what they call the Fountain Grove area, which is truly up in the area that I live in. So we're going to kind of block these darks in. Let's see, a few other darks that I want to hit in here. Oh, I see what I want to do. These are barn-like doors because they've got that wonderful patterning. So let's kind of, I could be real sloppy, but I'm being extra neat right now. Probably too neat. Start sloppy, finish neat. Or start loose, finish tight. Same meaning, different terminology. Okay, so we've got laid in those key darks. There's a few other little darks up in here, I see, a few down here, but nothing substantial like those 2 massive dark areas. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay in the shadow. I can either go the roof or the shadow. Let me think. That's kind of a novelty, huh? Painter thinking. I'm being facetious. A lot of people think painters are just wrists and we just kind of copy what we see. But it's amazing how many decisions you have to make while you're painting. So one of the things that I think I'm going to do is I'm going to set that brush down and pick up the number 8. Flat. All right. And I'm going to mix up a roof color, the color of that roof. So I'm going to start with white. It's light. But it's not real light. It's darker than the clouds. You got to figure, what color would you call that? I would call that a warm gray. So how do I mix a warm gray? Blue, brown, and white. Lean it a little bit more brown than you do blue. The white gives you your value. The brown gives you your warmth, and the blue gives you your cool. Not enough. Darker, not value, wrong. In other words, my value is too light. let's try that. Feels a lot better. Maybe a touch cold, but not too far off. So I'm going to come in from right here. And I'm holding the brush close now. And you notice I'm making a crisp edge, as opposed to the kind of painting I was doing when I was doing the trees. Totally different way of making marks. Which brings me to the simple commentary that painting is just a variation of color, value, and mark making. And knowing how to make interesting marks that convey the essence of what you're painting is something that most artists, myself included, strive for and work at for a long time to really get adept. Because when you first start, guarantee you're just not that good at it. You're okay, but you're not as good as you'd like to be. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. You know, it's like learning how to hit a baseball, learning how to golf, learning how to hit a pool shot. Now that looks about right. I might be a little dark now that I step back, but I don't know. If I am, I will adjust it. All right. The light is coming from here. I can tell because of the light on the barn. I can also tell because of the light on the trees. It's also coming from there because the lip of the roof is down low. So if I take that point and that point, the light is coming from there. And that's why it's striking, but it can't get back on the shadow side of the trees. So most of the roof, now, a couple things. The roof can be guided by light in terms of its color and its value, but it can also be guided to a degree by local color. Local color means something like a roof is going to have weather. It's going to have sunlight on it. It's going to have rain on it over however many years it is. So all that combined is going to cause it to take on different characteristics. I almost begin to see a little bit of a warmth happen up at the top. So what I did is I just barely stuck my brush in the orange. By the orange, I mean the cat orange hue that I have on my palette. It's really I've become kind of where I like that color. I didn't use it a lot for a long time, and there was a sale. hate to tell you my secrets. There was a sale on it at one of the art stores, and so I said, "Oh, I better pick it up," because I hadn't used it, and I went, "Geez, I kind of like that. I kind of like what I can do with it. I can warm my reds up when I want to." Because as I've told many of you, I don't use CADs. It's a CAD orange hue. Now, the other thing that can happen, sometimes we don't see it. You as the artist may not see this, but sometimes there can be clouds that affect different characteristics. Now, I never like that roof to look too flat, so I always like to come in and chop it up a little bit as I see subtle variations in value. I like to do that. Now, as it moves over to this side, it gets darker, but it's not as dark as the deep shadow up above, but it does get darker. So I can take my brown and my blue, mix it right into the color I was using, and we'll test it, see if I'm too dark. No, I'm just about right. Probably a little blue, probably a little too blue, but the value is good. I got 1 out of 2 things. I got the value. Didn't get quite the color, but the color, I'm not far off. Okay, so we got that down. Got a little bit. Now I'll mix that color that I just used into the color, and we'll come in and do a little bit of changing, so it doesn't look too flat. I always hate for a roof, particularly a roof on a barn or on anything that has age, even new things. I never like it to look like it's just one clean, flat color. Because if you really study, there are variations in it. So, you know, guess. If nothing else, guess. Say, okay, I'll add a little blue or I'll add a little brown. If it's wrong, wipe it out and do it again. Because it's the layering of sometimes being wrong will add to the overall characteristic of what you're trying to achieve. So being wrong sometimes, and it sure took me a long time to realize this, but being wrong sometimes can be an asset. Okay, so let's move down. We're just a little over 30 minutes in, a little behind where I want to be. I'm going to put the shadow in now because I have something to relate that shadow to. The shadow is darker and much more warm. So I'll start with the umber. I'm going to take some of that cad orange. This is a little too dark. I'm going to take some I think this is too dark. Maybe not. No, I don't think it is. I threw some, what do you call it? Yellow ochre into it. Now I just put some more of the quinacridine into it, and we're going to go right there. That's pretty good. I don't know why I made it go down there. I didn't want it to. And as I can see, as it goes over, it gets a little darker. But do I see that color anywhere else? Yeah, I kind of see it right there, don't I? Kind of see it back on the side, a little bit of reflected light back there. So let's see what we can do with that. That color right there. Move it on over. It fades, I can see that. And then I see almost that same color, maybe with a little bit more orange in it, right on the very edge. Because it gets a little bit of reflected light here. So we're kind of patchworking some of this in. I often don't paint this way, but I'm doing it because I will approach paintings differently. So I'm going to go a little darker. This time I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine to it, maybe a little more of the magenta. Let's see what this is like. No, I want to go darker still. This time I'm adding the asphaltum to go darker still. I was darker still. This time I'm going to be okay. I knew I had added enough asphaltum in there. Asphaltum's got a lot of red in it, so it really lays in beautifully into this color scheme. We'll let it fade, and we're going to bring it over on top. Bring a little bit more of that orange back into it. Okay, a little bit darker up here. Definitely darker in here. A little more of the orange in the quinacridine, but same. I'm just augmenting that color ever so slightly, you guys. Just changing it up just a little bit. And these are what I call guesstimates. In other words, it's pretty close to what I want. It may not be right exactly what I want, but it's pretty close. You just put it in there, and if you're wrong, you do the adjustment. Which is, I just described painting. It's exactly what painting is. Because, you know, just accept that you're going to do some things that aren't right. As soon as you can be willing to accept that, you're going to become a better painter. And as things are wrong, let them be wrong, but don't let them stay wrong. You know, it goes back to, it's only wrong if you leave it. That's another one of my favorite lines, because that's what happens to all of us. If you leave it, yeah, it's wrong. So allow yourself to be wrong and be astute enough in your own painting to see when you're wrong, because then you know you need to readjust that. Example, different from this plane to this plane. I see it right here. This plane gets a little bit darker. So what did I do? I just added a little asphalt to the color. Now I've changed the planes. This probably could be a little lighter at the end, but overall it's shaping up. We want to get that big mass in there, the overall mass, and then I'll go back and adjust. It gets darker because of that tree. The tree will not let some of that skylight in and illuminate that part of the structure. Therefore, I mean, I'm one of these guys that likes to figure out why. Some people don't. Some people just paint it, and that's perfectly all right. But, you know, I have a little bit more of a scientific mind, so I like to say, okay, this is why this is happening. Now, I think some of that comes from the fact that I illustrated for so many years, and in illustration, you have to do a lot of making up, a lot of improvising. And sometimes you need to kind of think and understand. I shouldn't say sometimes you need to think. Sometimes you need to understand why things are happening so that you can, as you progress in your painting, you can change it and make it work better. So let's keep on going. I kind of like some of the choppiness I did on the roof. Feels pretty good. I need to take the lower part of this under. There is a little piece of molding right here that allows, it actually begins to shade some of this. So we're going to go around down there. This side right here. And we got some dappled light, which I can add right at the very end. Coming through, it's really coming through the tree. I love dappled light. You guys have probably seen me do paintings. I mean, it's what you illuminate your painting at the very end with the dapple, with the pieces of light that are kind of streaming through whatever it is, whether it's a window, whether it's a tree or trees. It can be plural. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I can actually see some of that, believe it or not, coming through down in here. So I'm going to kind of lay some of this in, and then we'll lay the tree over it. Little bit of darkness right there. And that helps divide those planes. So what we're doing is we're setting up the shadows. All I've worked on so far is the shadows, as far as the basic structure. Now I just noticed something. I didn't catch it earlier. There is I think I paint this thing enough where I'd notice this. There is a doorway or something back here, and it's basically linear, kind of like that, and then a little bit underneath too. This kind of stuff I fuss with at the end. Okay, I want to take this and bring it over further. I didn't bring it over far enough. Now, let's start in a little bit on the trees, and then we'll get the bright light happening. Now, the dark of the trees in here is going to be kind of similar to this, maybe not quite as dark. So I'm going to take my brush that I was using, mix some Naples into it. I've got some umber already there, too much umber, a little bit more Naples, and I've got some residue of some white of some sort. Now I want to go warmer, so I'm going to go orange. The reason I'm going orange and not brown is orange will lighten it up a little bit, won't get too heavy on me. The cat orange light, the cat orange hue is not as dark, say, as an ultra or as a burnt umber, and because it's not as dark, it'll actually work better. So I want to be a touch just a little darker than the barn. So I threw a little bit more asphaltum into it, just so I get a little darker. There we go, just a little bit. Kind of move it around in a lot of areas, and if I need to, I can go back and readjust any of those colors. They're not working, but we want to start with something. You know, don't be timid. If anybody's going to paint plein air, definitely do not be too timid. If you're too timid, you get everything in, oh, that's pretty good, and then all the lights changed. Everything has changed on you. So you got to be bold. You got to trust yourself and just put it in there. Pretend like everything you did is exactly the way it's supposed to be. May not be. But if you get it in there with an appropriate amount of time, you're going to have time to go back and do some adjustments on that. If you don't get it in there in that amount of time, the adjustments are going to be so radically different than the way it looked when you first started that you're painting a different kind of a painting. Now, there can be subtle advantages to allowing you to improvise a little bit in terms of light, because sometimes I'll see a piece of light strike something that it wasn't striking in the beginning, and as long as it doesn't violate the overall feeling of the way the light is coming and hitting the piece, I'll use it. So one of the nice things that happens in plein air as opposed to studio when you're working from something like a photograph is you're gonna see some of those subtle changes as things progress, and you can add them into your painting, which is really kind of neat. So I'm looking at value more than color right now. I don't want any of these edges. It's very, I can't see exactly what the edges are like. They're so diffused in this image. So you want the paint that way. So you notice I'm just barely touching that brush down. I still have to paint a lot of other stuff in here, but we're getting it in. We're going to come over in here. I don't want to go too far, but I do want to go into the shadow right now. So I'm going to lighten that green up just a little bit. I think I might have lightened it a little too much, but let's try it. Yeah, I did. So go back to the green. Bring some blue back into it and see if that'll help. Got to be really careful because I'm painting on top of that red color, and every time I put my brush down, I pick up that red. So every time I put it down, I go down and pick up fresh paint. I can't make more than 1 or 2 strokes without contaminating. Now, some of it I may want to contaminate. Some of it I may want to intermingle a little bit. I add a little bit lighter tone to it, just so I can get a little bit more of that edge showing off. Okay? To me, it's working all right. So I'm going to move on down to some of these other areas. If that color is just about right, let's get a little bit of it into this tree. That's too light down in there, so use the magic finger there and we'll change it up. Get a little bit more green into that color. I see more green right here. Boom. Right there. So put it in there. Don't, like I said, don't be afraid. Mess it up a little bit. Sometimes messing it up, you will shock yourself if you don't look at it just as you do it, and you look back at it 20 minutes later, and it looks a lot better than you thought when you first put it in. Of course, the opposite happens sometimes too, or it looks worse. But it's something I learned over the course of the years, that sometimes when I judge things too quickly as I'm doing them, I make mistakes. Where if I don't, and I keep moving, and then go back and look at it, it really wasn't that much of a mistake. So, go back to my number 6 here. I'm going to take my orange, cad orange light, a little Naples yellow. I'm trying to come up with a beautiful red, warm red, and I got to mix some ochre into it because it's actually too pure, and the ochre will mellow that purity out a little bit, and I think it's going to be around in here. That's probably a little too bright, but I don't mind it. This is that improvise aspect that I was talking about. Clean that edge up. So I got to step back for 1 second. You know, it feels okay. Son of a gun. Except I got that perspective a little off. I bring it down, and then over. And that's why I didn't paint that tree all the way over. in case you're wondering, the tree has to come over further, but I knew that I wanted to overlap this so that now I'm adding just a little of the magenta and a little more ochre to it. It's deepening it just a little bit. A little more ochre. Not much. All right, so where else do I see that color? Similar, right here. But I made a mistake. My God, I made a mistake. And this needs to come over about here. So thankfully, I still had a little of that color mixed up. And a little piece of it now that I see sneaks right down there. Probably a little, I guess it's okay. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to use this light for the dapple too, by the way. We're going to come in a little bit darker right here. So I just mix a little of the shadow color back into that. And then a little lighter. A little darker. A little right here. A little darker. So change of a plane right there. So we just kind of just brush it in there. It's already working. So if I just step back and I could see that it was working pretty much the way I wanted to. It's looking like light, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this look like the light part of the barn. And some dapple. Well, I don't want to do the dapple right now. It's really tempting. I can test it, just make it color a little bit darker with a little quinacridine and a little ochre, and I can test it, say, right, follow that line down, let's say right about in here. Okay. So there's no light here. So that's pretty much the only place I'm going to be using that color, and I might want to vary it a little bit, but for right now, let's leave it alone. All right, let's go. I added a little bit of, to the shadow color, a little asphaltum to darken it right as it goes under the awnings, just to deepen it just a little bit. And I can see a little bit of that same darkness right where that molding is. It looks like it's about here, I'm guessing, but I think I'm right. I may look at it at the end and realize I'm wrong and have to go back and adjust it, but I think I'm right. Okay, so leave that alone. It's a little darker down at the base, and it gets quite a bit darker. I went almost pure asphaltum right in here. Okay, so we've moved some color around. Now, I want to go back. I got a lot more to do on this. Let's go into that tree just a little bit more so we at least get it set up, okay? And, you know, if I don't get it all done, so be it. So I added a lot of yellow because it's quite a bit brighter. And I'm going to bring a little ochre into it because I just put it down. It felt a little biting, a little acidy. And the ochre should mellow that out a little bit. Let's try it again. Now, it's something I may want to really push more at the end, but right now I don't want it to get that powerful. A little darker. Intermix your colors. Don't put a color down and say, well, that's it, that's the way I'm going, because they do intermix. So there's nothing wrong sometimes with letting a little bit of one color feed into another. And it really happens wonderfully when it's a warm into a cool or a cool into a warm. I keep going back to things that I've heard in the past from different artists, from different instructors. And one of them is to find a way to work warms into your cools and cools into your warms. Love that saying. Because it keeps your piece from looking static. So even in foliage, don't be afraid to mix an orange into it every now and then. Or like here's a pure ochre. Just, even if it isn't there, because it could be. It could be. Foliage is, dies off at different times. And I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that it can be. One thing I'm trying not to do is, you probably are noticing, is when I put these strokes down, I'm not trying to blend them out. And that's because I want it to have that wonderful freedom. Now I'm falling a little bit far behind, so I've got to start kicking up my what I'm going to do, because I still need to go into this. And the foreground isn't going to take all that long, even though I might want to go back into it later and do a little touch up here and there. But right now we just want to get that tree. Fun. Fun strokes. Always can punch more. That's why you don't want to punch everything right in the beginning. Push. Okay, we're going to leave that alone. I don't want to go too much farther on that tree right now. I could, I just don't want to. The other tree up above, I'm going to bring some more blue into that color I was using, a little bit more brown because it's a little acidy for what I want, but I want a little bit of overlapping right here. So the tree is why I didn't paint that part of the tree earlier, because I knew I was going to paint the building and I wanted the tree to come in and overlap. A little bit more brown. And what that'll do is darken it and punch it a little bit. Oh, you know what I want? There is a little light there. So I'm going to go back to my 6, clean it up a little bit, pick out some of that light, and we're going to sneak it back in here. Okay? So it's back in there. Good. Down, and let's get some darks. Some of the dark of the foliage back in here. Here. Okay. Look over in here. Nope. I don't see that color of foliage. Don't see that color here. I do see a little bit of that tree. So brown and green, pretty dark. And it kind of drifts this way and almost comes up into that. And I can make it even darker. I can take blue and asphalt them, and that's almost as dark as I can go right here. So I could push a little bit more if I want to. And I'm going to add some orange to that because it was feeling a little cold. Okay. Don't want to go, actually I do want to go much further. I just don't want to take the time. I want to be able to move, make the whole thing feel complete. Basically what these 90-minute, they're giant lay-ins. Is what they are. It's a lay-in that I would love to be able to go back, and occasionally, I know last week I went back in and put in about 20 minutes after I was done. I didn't do it immediately. I took a break, came back, I put about 20 minutes into it. If I stood there and painted, I probably would have put 60 minutes into it. But by getting away from it and coming back, I saw it differently. And some of the things that to me that were flaws, weren't flaws. You view it differently. That's one of the reasons you always want to get away. Now, in a plein air piece, you can't. And you learn. That's how you learn different things. In a studio piece, you can get away from it as much as you want to. Go back on it, get away from it, go back on it, So studio paintings have a different character. They can have a more refined, and a lot of times that's where overwork comes in. People will overwork a studio painting because they have the opportunity to go back and, for lack of a better word, screw it up. Change that perspective a little bit there. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of a smaller brush. Let me see what we got here. I've got a number 6 filbert. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this. And that's actually a little bit more difficult than it looks. the far side of it on the left, well, let me get rid of my paint rag. I had enough stuff on that paint rag that I could have done a whole painting just off the rag. I have a very warm white that I mixed up. Actually, I was using it last week. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my, and we're going to go this way. We're going to go, we want a little bit of an angle on this first part. So we're going to go, this is the lightest part of it right there. I love the way it intermixed. Now I want to go a little darker as it starts to move around. So we could take that same color, just let my brush barely scrape the blue and bring a little bit of a coolness into it. Not much, just a little bit. That looks pretty good right about here. So we're going to do it again, right? And we're not going to go at that angle. We're going to go at this angle because it's slightly changing. So I'm going behind the tree. And then we're going to go straight across to this point. Okay? And we're going to leave it. I probably painted a little too thick, but I don't mind it. So I'm going to, now it darkens quite a bit. So I'm going to take the same color with the blue, and I'm going to, just a touch of umber to that blue, and let's test it. Right? Now this is where it's going to be pretty flat. Right about here. So I'm going to take it from here. No, I want it a little darker. I can tell with that first stroke that I can afford to go a little bit darker on it. Let's try this. Probably a little lighter. I went a little too dark too fast. And okay, now darker still. Now at this point, it goes almost as dark as the roof. Because it's changing, it's moving around away from the light. So it's almost as dark as the roof, and it starts to angle back up, slightly. Wow, nope, darker still. Thought I had it. Right there. Pretty good. Probably could be a touch lighter. So I'm coming over it one more time. See, I'm messing areas up. It's one of the problems when you lay this stuff down. Oh, I will clean that up. There we go. Now it gets a little lighter. Too light. Let's get it in there. And then it stays almost the same as it goes to the edge. Maybe a little lighter, but not much. This looks to be almost the lightest. And then at this point, it starts to go up again, and it goes right about there. Okay? So we moved it around, and I did mess up part of it. So what I do is I take this color again. And this is where sometimes it ends up working for you. I'm not telling you it's gonna. But sometimes by going over it again, readjusting, you actually improve it. Let's hope I do, okay? No guarantees. Okay. Now I can go back into the tree if I want at any time. But for right now, we're going to leave it at that. I want to go, there's a couple of little darks. And I can go back to my original number 2 that I was using. And I'm going to take pure asphaltum, maybe a touch of blue, because I want to go very dark. And I want to put a little dark right here. Perfect. Yeah, they're close. Another one right here. And they're all around. Looks like there's one here too. Barely see it. I'm looking elsewhere to see if I see them. I see a couple little darks right about there. Made them a little too big, but it doesn't bother me. It works pretty good. This needs to go up a little bit more, I can see. Okay. Now let's go in and start to do a little bit of refining before I move on to the area down below. I'm looking for my smaller brushes. I was looking for a liner, but I don't see one. I was in Mexico last week, vacationing, but I also did about 4 paintings, 4 little plein air pieces while I was there. And I took my water-soluble oils. So I took my, it's probably still in my kit. So I want kind of a cool, but kind of a, this is probably a little too light, and I'm going to come right in here. That's a little too, it's 2 things. It's a little too light, and it's a little too cold. So I mixed some more brown into it. We're painting back in the shadows there. Kind of fun. So we want this to feel like it's back in the shadows. There. And I'll clean it up because I'm messing up. Paint real fast sometimes. You don't make it as neat as you want, but to a degree I wanted to keep it loose, so I don't want it to be too perfect. That worked pretty well. And kind of keep, now I've pronounced it more than it is there. Maybe I brought it out a little too much, I don't know. I'm going to take a color that is kind of ochre-y, similar in value to this part of the barn. And I want a little bit more light on it because I see a little light here coming through the tree here, boom, there, and about to there, okay? And then there's a couple of little, and they're actually getting a little dappled light. So I can use a color almost like I was using, but I want to go a little darker. The blue, the brown, let's go just a little bit darker than what I was doing. I'm going to wipe my little fingernail off, and we're going to put these 2 little beams in. I see one about here. And I see the other one below it, right about here. I kind of clumsied those up. So what I do when that happens is you take that dark and you trim them back down. Okay. And there's a little piece of light hitting, right before it. Maybe we'll put a little right there. So we've got a little dappled light happening there. Okay, so I'm going to take this beam. It also gets a little bit of light right here and there. And I can take the same color with a little bit of the barn color, and we can put it right. I hope I'm not blocking you too much. I probably am, but there. So now the next thing we want to do, we want to put these little, the whites in of these little, I don't know what they are, but we want them to be kind of in shadow, so we don't want them, so we're going to put, I'm going to put them all in the squares, and then I'll put the darks in them. That's a little, I could probably make it a little warmer. Still not warm enough, I don't think. I just mixed a little bit of orange back into that blue. It just feels better. I don't want this color to be too powerful. There. There. Right about here. And we'll keep on going. There's one here. I really warmed that color up a lot. Now it starts to get light. Right about in here. Okay? Now, because you can see the light is on the barn, so it makes sense that it's going to be on the whites. Now, those are pretty white. They're as white as this. So I used the same color. I already had it mixed up, and we're going to put a light one here, and then one right there. And we're going to take the same color while it's mixed up. We're going to sneak one right about there, there, the lower part, and the upper part goes into shadow. Okay, so we pretty much have those in. Now, if they're not in exactly neatly the way you want them, again, you take this background color and just clean them up. Change the perspective so it's correct. Okay? Now, each one of those has a little dark area, so I can go back to my ultramarine, my asphaltum, clean my little finger, and we're going to pop the little one there. One there. There. So you build. This is where I say you start simple, finish complex, or you start sloppy, finish neat. However you want to say it. Start with the big basics, end with what you might consider more refinement or more indication of detail. So it begins to look complete. So the whole thing starts to take on. Now I can put the last minute, I'm going to chop some of this up where I messed it up earlier. But the last minute, I can come in and put in some of that dappled light. But before we do, we've got about 20, a little over, almost 25. We're going to put this big area in here. So I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to pick up some Naples and some ochre. I think those are the two colors I'm probably going to use. Now it's a little duller than that, so I'm going to bring some white into it. Maybe a little bit of umber, not the asphaltum, but the umber. And a touch of green, just because I don't want it too loud. I don't want it to scream. Let's see what this looks like. It's probably a little more green than I want. So bring some ochre and some Naples back into that green and a little terp. I want this to be real thin so I can lay other stuff on it. So what we're going to do is something that's a little too, I went a little too warm. That feels pretty good. I would just want to get close. Oh, I like that kind of edge that I'm getting there. And we'll sneak that right back in there, pull it up. Those are weeds. So we're indicating stand back for a second. It's starting to shape up. I still got to do all the stuff up here and some ribbing. I think I'm going to be okay time-wise. A little, probably about, I'm guessing 5 minutes behind where I would like to be. So what you got to do is you got to make up your time. Or I got to make up my time. Some green up in here. That's why I'm not going all the way up right now. I kind of don't want this all to be real flat. So I'm picking up a little bit more green into that color. We're going to come right in here. A little bit more. It's got a little bit of a downhill slope right here. And then we'll go back to the original color, which doesn't have the green in it. Maybe I'll bring a little bit more umber into it. Still keeping very close value. A little too green, more ochre, or white. Actually, it's kind of nice. It reads pretty well. I do want to get a little bit more of this down slope, so I'm going to pronounce the value contrast a little warm right in here, just a little bit more. Maybe a little back in here, just a... Okay, now up at the top, there's more green, so I added right about here. Not a lot, but a little bit more. a little too green, so I'm throwing ochre. Every now, sometimes if I put my brush down, I'm not only picking up paint, I'm sometimes I'm sometimes changing the color a little more green, a little bit more brown. So it's not the same color or even the same value that I'm constantly putting down. And it's really what foliage is all about. It's not about a color, a green, and I see people, it's one of the hard things I deal with when I deal sometimes with students is to get them to realize that, because they're trying to be too perfect and it's actually working against you. Be a little freer, be wrong. And man, if somebody had told me that, I don't know that I could have done it when I was first learning. I really don't. I think it's a very confusing concept. And I don't know if you have to paint and do a lot of, make your mistakes and begin to realize that sometimes those mistakes end up working for you. And I think that is one of the big assets of experience. People, you learn a lot. You say, well, I've got a lot more experience than you, and that's why I can do what I can do. And there are people, and there's so much truth in that. Okay, let's finish up this one tree. It has a trunk, which I had never put in, but I will now, right about here. And some foliage at the bottom, which I don't like to do with a small brush, but it's what I have in my hand. So, and sometimes varying it from one brush to another also can create interest. So you aren't making everything with the same brush. Okay, now I'm going to use this little brush right here. I'm going to clean off my yardstick because I am going to lay it down. So what I want to do is I want to put these little beams in. These little, I call them beams. I don't know what you would refer to. They're where the plane changes on the roof from one area to another. They're not real light, but they're not real dark. So I'm going to start about here. I'm trying not to lay it down on the whole. So we're going to start right about here. It's a little lighter than I wanted. So I picked up a little bit I have a lot of different colors, so I just kind of keep mushing colors together until I feel I've got something close. Okay. Gets a little lighter on this one. Right about there. Okay, and I almost want to hit and miss. I almost want it to start, stop, hit again, hit again, and then get a little brighter right at the very bottom, right about here. And next one over, similar. Let's see, right about there. Let's start it up here. Whoops. So I'm bracing this on both the easel, not on the painting. I could probably pronounce that a little bit more later if I want to. We're going to go back here. This time I'm laying it on the painting itself, but I'm trying to just hit it on one part of the painting. And we're going to go from here down. And that that was actually a pretty good hit and miss. And then the other side, at this other point, it really doesn't show a beam. It just gets lighter. So what I can do at this point is just let let this whole area get a little lighter as it goes over to the edge. And just, again, chop that area up. Now, let's go under the very top part. Let's see what I got brush-wise here. If I've got a brush I like. I think that's half the battle sometimes when you're painting. Picking out the right brush. Oh, I did have a liner. Son of a gun. I don't want that liner right now, but I might want to come back and sharpen up some of that stuff because I can see example right at this point. Cleaned it up just a little bit. We'll clean up a little bit at the top. Okay, I do want the liner at one part, and I'm going to use it right now, and then I'll switch over. And I'm going to use this as a mall stick now, just to rest my hand on. I don't want it too warm, and I don't want it too dark. I think I'm about right here. Similar to the roof color, actually. It's probably a little darker than I wanted, but beggars can't be choosers right now, so I'm just going to live with it. Mall stick. Now, if it stands out too much, what I would do later is go back and paint the negatives. But I might want to paint that a couple times to get it to where I want it to feel right. It's got a little bit of a lip right about here. And then we'll take our bigger brush and we'll get the darks in. And the darks, again, mall stick, are going to sit right here. That's about right. I could probably be a little warmer, is all. But its value looks good. And when you're painting fast, get your values right. If your color's off, you can fix that later. Dark down below, really nice and dark, kind of warm. And center. Not crazy about that. It doesn't feel like it's got the right weight. And then there's 1, 2. This is where you just kind of fake it. A lot of little break up a space in here. And I think generally what I'll do is I'll do it this way, and then I'll go back and paint the negatives and paint it until it feels like feels about right. Because right now it's okay. It's not really good. It's okay. And we're going to take this shadow and it creeps down right here and it changes. So we get a little bit of that shadow in there. And the overall, at this point, it's set up. That's, I was a little late in getting it all set up. But at this point, it's set up. What does that mean? That means now I can go in and start to refine areas, make areas work better. Now, it doesn't leave me a lot of time. I've got about 10 minutes to do that in. If I want to put the reeds in, I would put those in. One of the things that I want to do that I didn't do earlier is I'll go back with the 6. And we got a few little abstract lights and darks kind of peeking through. Whoops, I didn't want to be that warm. Peeking through back here. All right, I'll take the shadow, clean that up. And then we get little pieces of light, but almost a cool light, not so much of that wonderful yellow light that I was using. So it's a little cooler. Similar value. And what does it sit? It sits about here, and here. This is where you can just have some abstract kind of fun. I even like that. Now, I feel I could leave that and then fuss on it later if it bugs me with the tree itself. And piece of light right down at the very base. And it cuts that tree off. I'm not sure what that is. Probably there's some architecture down below, I know. And really, it's got a good overall feel. There are parts I do like, and there are parts that I don't like. And at this point, I'll do a little bit of correcting. I'll probably do a little more correcting off camera, but I'll do a little bit of correcting right now. And I'll show you what I mean by that. First, we're going to clean up. Wrong blue. Let's get that right. Let's try it again. Yeah, there we go. Get that. All right, now while I've got that blue mixed up, I can actually take, I was going to take my liner, and I was going to hit some negatives, like there. Just to kind of loosen it up a little bit, make it feel a lot better. I can take, again, the liner, a little bit lighter. I'm not going to punch it a lot, but I am going to try and hit. And a little bit from up above. Hits and misses. And it adds something rather than try and paint it a really clean, neat color than to, because again, it's weathered. Think about it. This has been up here for a long time, roof, and parts of it maybe got rust on it. Other parts got sunlight, and it reads pretty well. So you get these kind of wonderful little accidental flaws, for lack of a better word. Now I can take the same color, add a little bit more white to it, a little bit of the yellow, the white, and I can clean up. Where do I want to clean up? Well, this gets a little light out right here. Gets a little light right about here. So we start to just amplify. Now, one thing I didn't do that I said I was going to do, we got a little time, the Dappled Light. All right, so I've got the color mixed up. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to hit a little light there. It's starting to work. Had to stand back for a second to see. And I can put too much in and then start to take it back out with the shadow color. And I do have to hit a light on a couple of these trees. I just realized that. And I can hit a few variations of slight darks just to back in here. So you make it feel like detail without really doing a whole lot, just a little bit here and there. And again, I could carry that further. I do want to get the tops of some of those trees in, which I did miss earlier. There's a couple of there's some posts back there, which again, that's what you use your liner for. Those little, I call them linear snaps that you throw in at the very end. So there's some right about in here. And I don't want it too warm, and I don't want it too cold, and I don't want it too dark. Okay, that gives me some posts. So now we mix up a nice green with my ochre, my green, and my yellow, and my white. And we're going to start up more ochre, too acidy. A little bit more green. Probably had that right in front of your view. A little more green on this tree. A little more ochre. A little more orange. The reason I'm mentioning it is I do change those colors up quite a bit. I don't stay with that one color for too many strokes. I tend to get it in there and then change it and hopefully make it better. Whoops, made a mistake there. My God, I made a mistake. Don't like that. Let's fix that. Go back, shadow color, clean it up. If I want to, I can bring that down just a little bit. There we go. And you see how we're doing time-wise. Just about done. And we're going to put some of those lights in here and there. Different greens than I mixed up before. I'm throwing some blue into that green, by the way, right now. Just want to come in on this tree a little bit. I see a little bit bluer. So I've got a pretty good, the overall color variation in here is looking pretty good. This tree is looking pretty good. Giving them my overall assessment of what I might want to go back and fix. Because I think that's what we all have to do as we paint. You know, you're going to get it. It's not all going to be there on the first pass, which this is. And you're going to want to go back and kind of correct. So I would like to darken that a little bit. That bothers me as I stand back here. I want to add a little bit more texture in here, which I probably will do. I can do that with a clean brush. I can take this brush and sweep up and just bring some dirt back into some of this stuff, just so it isn't so pristine. And these, truthfully, on the foliage part, go back and forth as much as you feel you need to. If you want to do it and then go back tomorrow and do some more, depends on how you feel about it. You know, give it some time. Give it a little bit of time and to see how you feel about it as the painting sits and you get away from it and come back and see it with a fresh eye. You see it with a fresh eye, and I guarantee you some things will bug you that never bugged you before, and there's going to be things that bug you that aren't going to bug you at the very end. So it's going to work both ways. That's why getting away from it is really helpful. Now, give you a quick assessment. I'm going to want to probably put one more layer of light in there. And what I mean by that is I'm going to do a stroke or two just to show you, and then we're going to call it quits. So I'm going to go into my color that I already had mixed up with some Naples and some white, and we'll kind of come in, maybe not quite. A little bit lighter, particularly back by the barn. I kind of see it that way, but on top of it, I think it'll help. I got to be very careful I don't just go up and down, because that can get really boring. So you kind of want to vary. If I catch myself doing that, and then I go, whoop, what am I doing? Anyway, actually that helped. You can see, hopefully you can see what I did there. I stand back from it, looks okay. I could definitely clean some of this area up in here. Could clean a little bit of this in. I know I could add a lot more interest in terms of coloration in that roof. You know, I don't know how far I could take it, but I know I could bring a little bit more warms and cools. Like I said, cools into, but the key is don't vary that value that much. Try different colors. Don't vary the value. You vary the value too much and it's just not going to work. So there's some greens I brought into it. Helps age it a little bit. Overall, the feeling, the illumination part, I think is working. It's probably the best part of it is the fact that it's illuminated. Part of that I can attribute to the wonderful piece of reference that I happen to have shot. God, I couldn't even tell you how many years ago. I was painting, and I shot this while I was painting out here. So, farewell Fountain Grove Barn, but it's one of those wonderful icons here in the Santa Rosa area. And truthfully, the people that live here really miss it. And I hear a lot of people, myself included, talk about it. I loved it for its aesthetic purposes. Other people for different purposes, it's historical significance. And there is historical significance to it. In any event, everybody, thank you all for watching. Obviously, I'm not live today, so that's why I'm not answering a lot of questions. It's because I know I'm going to be out of town this weekend, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, teaching a workshop up in Reading. So we'll be back live next week. And hopefully it was helpful. And Scott, thanks for putting this up, letting everybody see it. And all of you have a good time painting. Enjoy. And that's it. Bye-bye.